The 2025 NCAA March Madness Men's Tournament is back, and this time it is bringing all the feels. The biggest event in college sports is here, with games happening all day long, and you don't want to miss a second of the heart-pumping action. Catch all the clutch shots, big-time plays, upsets, Cinderellas, Blue Bloods, and more. Tune into the NCAA Men's Division I Basketball Championship March 18th through April 7th on TBS, CBS, TNT, True TV, and stream on Max.
Just in case you missed it, it's the top 5 sports talkers of the day. Now, it's time for Dan Barreiro's Top 5 at 5.
It is indeed that time again. Guardsy out tracking Golden Gopher women's basketball. They've got a basically I don't know the fancy name of it. It's the women's version of the NIT is what it is, the consolation tournament. The Gophers will be playing, in fact, on the Plus, I believe, starting at 6 o'clock tonight against, is it Toledo? I'll double check. I think we're playing Toledo.
I want to say it is Toledo.
I'm pretty sure it's Toledo. That's a first-round game. We should be playing at home, but we can't because we've got arenas that are kind of full right now in the greater metropolitan area. But where do we want to begin?
It is, in fact, Toledo for women's hoops at 6 on the Plus. Let's start with the big tourney, the big dance NCAA tournament. Here's all the scores that you need to know. Creighton takes down Louisville. Some may have busted some people's brackets.
Yeah.
The fan has learned Dan Barreiro doesn't care about whether it's busted
I don't care about your bracket.
Yeah, no.
I don't care about your brackets. If it's going good, I don't care. If it's going bad, I care even less.
Purdue takes care of High Point. Number 1 seed Auburn had a little bit of scare in the first half against Alabama State, then pulled away. Number 1 seed Houston just dominates SIU Edwardsville, wherever that may be.
Edwardsville, Illinois, I believe.
So. The Badgers, border battle, they take care of 14 seed Montana. And live scores right now, 6 seed BYU up 72-60 over VCU. And then Georgia, 9 seed, just getting stomped by. Are you Gonzaga or Gonzaga?
I like the sound of Gonzaga better, but
yeah.
I'm told technically it's supposed to be Gonzaga.
Gonzaga.
As in the Zags, so it's Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga sounds like it's got more gravitas to it.
I would agree with you on that. Yeah, 58-38. But as I mentioned, I left off one score because 12 seed McNeese knocked off Clemson. They were dominating them in the first half. I think it was like 31-15 or something at halftime. Clemson comes all the way back, but still loses 69-67. McNeese moving on in your brackets.
Yeah, it was a furious. The halftime score was 31-13 McNeese. And in the second half, Clemson scored 54 points and outscored McNeese 54-38. But McNeese had just enough to hold on to win as a 12 seed, as you mentioned. And as we've been reminding people pretty much all afternoon, the great storyline involves the McNeese head coach, Will Wade, who reportedly has already accepted a job to coach at North Carolina State next year, but still decided to coach the team, or maybe was given that option. I don't know which. And the concern that the players might be distracted, they certainly did not seem distracted at all. This is, in fact, the first time McNeese State has ever won or ever advanced in the big dance. So, in fact, they play, I think, Purdue next. I think that's the matchup. Purdue,
I believe that
McNeese
is the case.
is the next matchup.
Check.
So, it's a good Purdue team. I wouldn't call it a dominant Purdue team by any means. So, I don't know if the glass slipper will continue to fit for McNeese, but it was a very, very nice storyline for sure.
It is Purdue. And to answer your question the first hour, whether, if you're into it, if it's lost its luster, for me as a non-hoops guy, it all depends on how many local angles I can follow.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I've got 3 of them this year in the tournament with my dad going to Wisconsin, so I follow them.
That helps.
Mom's a diehard Iowa State fan. They're also 3 seed. And then the hometown team, the Drake Bulldogs, they're a little team. They're a sneaky team at 11 seed.
That's true.
So anyways, let's go here. The Vikings, they've got a new wide receiver. What do you know about Rondell Moore?
Well, I know that I always loved him as a college player, a scat back kind of guy, multi-purpose kind of a guy, return guy. Could make people miss. He missed this entire last season with a knee injury. So the obvious question is, what has that done to his explosiveness? I'm doubting that they had to spend a lot of money on him, but I like taking a look at him. I like what he represents. There's a chance. I'm assuming he's going to be competing for the number 3 receiver spot because that's now open, believed to be open, and maybe doing some return duties as well. I don't think he did. I think it's been a while since he's done some of those, but it's a guy you can kind of move around, multi-purpose kind of a guy. I've always liked him. So to me, it's one of the. My guess is it's a high, it's a low risk, reasonably high reward kind of a situation where you're probably not spending all that much money. And if you strike gold and he recovers nicely, you got a nice little added value to your offense, an offense that already seems to have a lot of interesting pieces.
Time now for the obligatory Kevin Fallness Minnesota Wild mention.
And they deserve it, at least temporarily. They beat the Seattle Kraken 4-0. Gustafsson gets the shutout. The Wild scored 3 goals in the opening 5 minutes. It was over from the start. In the next game, Boldy gets 2 of them. By the way, he ties Kirill Kaprizov, who's missed 30-some games, for the team lead in goals. Next game, Saturday, matinee affair against Buffalo at the X.
We better win that one, correct?
Yeah, Buffalo
We're supposed to win that one.
And they traded away good players.
So we had a really nice in-depth conversation with Russo on a number of fronts regarding the current condition of the club, some of his battles with Billy Guerin. And I think, as we talked about earlier, Boldy finally scores, not once in this game last night, but twice. You got to sort of have to keep that going. As long as your main guys are out, you're going to have some of your other main guys have to score more consistently than they have been, and Boldy certainly is a part of that classification.
And shout out to Liam Ogren, gets on the score sheet as well. First goal at home. I love to see young, skilled, small forwards that Bill Guerin probably hates. I love to see them succeed and score goals. Last but not least for this, the Wolves, I'll take hand-up responsibility because yesterday at Top 5 at 5, I essentially called the game loser-proof. I said the Pelicans are terrible. They've got nothing to play for. Well, wouldn't you know it, the Wolves feel like they're entitled to a win, and they just show up flat.
Second straight game, they did not deliver. That's correct.
So they get a rematch against those same Pelicans tomorrow, which you'll hear at 7, pregame at 6:45 right here in the Fan.
Well, for the moment, by the way, we have fallen into the 8th spot. The Clippers are a team we don't talk about much, but they're playing pretty well. They're not bad. And now they are in the 7th spot, a game ahead of us. I don't know who holds the tiebreaker there, but we're 40 and 31. It's actually just percentage points because we're 9 over, they're 9 over. But they have 1 fewer loss. They've played fewer games. But they're a little bit ahead of us. Warriors still at 6 at 40 and 29. We are now 2 games behind the Warriors in the loss column, which actually means we're 3 games behind them because if we tie them, they're ahead of us. So that's why these sorts of hiccups, stubbing your toe twice in a row at home, is a problem. Once in a row, you go, it's going to happen. But I have no mercy for what took place last night, especially when you deliver the kind of just sort of casual defensive performance that they did against the Pels. And you'd like to think they're going to make sure they win the next one. They can't mess around at this point. But Zion Williamson looks like an all-pro against us, and he looked very good again yesterday. So we'll see. And then that's the end of the homestand, which you could start it going, well, you can go 5-0. You should go 5-0 on this homestand. Right now, they're 2-2. So this is a rather crucial game before they hit the road, I think, against the Pacers.
They have it.
Works for me. In fact, when we come back, a special added guest. Ooh. Our guy, Lou Raguse, who we tried to get on yesterday. It was a very busy day for him. We're going to get a quick update on some details regarding a trial he's covered in depth. 2 more guilty verdicts in the Feeding Our Future case. That broke yesterday. Lou Raguse now has 24 hours to sort of sit on that story and think about it and tell us what he thinks the most important lessons are from it. KARE 11 reporter next here in the Fan.
Wolves fans, we just don't talk ball, we live it. And now we're throwing you a full court lob with $15 tickets to select March games. Don't just hear us break it down. Be there, feel the energy, lose your voice, and howl with us. Use code KFAN ! At Timberwolves.com/March to get your $15 tickets. Use code KFAN !
Two more verdicts came in the ongoing Feeding Our Future case involving a very big name, Amy Bach and Salim Saeed as well. They were both found guilty on all counts. And a man who's been all over this story for quite some time, and certainly trial coverage for sure, is Lou Raguse from KARE 11. We've had him on several times before. And we figured even though the story broke yesterday, it's still worth spending a minute or two on to get his views on his reporting, I guess I should say, on exactly what took place here and kind of where we go from here. He joins us via the Connecticut Water Systems Hotline. Thanks again for the time. You've covered enough cases to know that when you try to get into the business of, well, wow, only 5 hours as opposed to, 7 days of deliberation, that it's kind of knee-jerk, and who knows what prompts a quick verdict as opposed to one that takes a lot longer. People sometimes want to assume that it's indicative of the possibility that, in this case, the prosecution did such a thorough job and that maybe the defense did not have much to sort of push back. What's your view on exactly how this thing played out, and how surprised were you that indeed a verdict came in as quickly as it did?
Well, Dan, first of all, thanks for having me on. I think if there's one thing that it does say, it's that they didn't need to fight with each other very much to come to a conclusion. And the way that the last couple of days of the trial played out, I actually predicted a verdict by noon. So,
oh, wow.
And, I'm only half kidding, and I don't publicize that,
sure.
Until
right.
after the fact. But
Right.
and I'm only half kidding, but it was such a landslide by the prosecution the last couple of days. And they brought it all together with the closing argument. When you have a really long trial like that, where there's just so many little bits of evidence along the way, the closing argument helps bring it all together, reminds you of what you heard about on the first day of the trial, and tells you how all these things link together. And man, closing arguments, it seemed like a landslide. It just seemed so obvious that both of them were guilty. So to me, it was absolutely no surprise.
So what made this case interesting, of course, is Amy Bach is the leader, basically, of Feeding Our Future. So there'd been already a number of guilty verdicts, in a couple cases, some acquittals as well. But I assume that's largely why people were still interested in this case was, all right, this is towards the top of the food chain, right? This is one of the leaders of this thing, and can it be connected to her? What was her defense or her attorney's defense on her behalf?
Yeah, the reason this was so much, I've been calling this the main event of this Feeding Our Future case, which is a $250 million meal fraud, meals that were meant to go to children during the pandemic. It's the largest pandemic fraud in the United States. Amy Bach was the executive director of Feeding Our Future, which is the nonprofit that had oversight, that was sponsoring all these so-called meal sites that actually weren't serving the meals. And she really kept a lot of the fraud at arm's length. And what made it really interesting to me is she did not steal nearly as much money as many of the others, most of the others. But the prosecution told the jury that her motive went beyond money. She craved the attention, being the leader of what turned into essentially a multi-million dollar corporation. This was supposed to be a nonprofit. She loved the praise that she received, and just one witness testified that Amy Bach was a god to the East African community, which is where, most of these meal sites and most of this money went. So her defense then was that I wasn't the one that committed this fraud. It was happening beneath me. I had clever employees that were lying to me and keeping it from me. And I did find out about some fraud, but I did my best to report it and shut it down. So that was her defense, but it just didn't hold water at the end.
No, and in fact, you had written a story. In fact, we quoted from it, I think, maybe a week or so ago, in which I think you noted that there was even a couple of events where she was serenaded, right? I mean, there were songs being sung on her behalf, speaking to your point about the position she seemed to be in here in terms of the adulation that she was receiving in this environment.
Yeah, at one point she sued, or I guess Feeding Our Future sued, but she essentially was Feeding Our Future, the Department of Education, because they were trying to slow it down and they were refusing to approve new meal sites. And so they had the audacity to sue MDE, and they got a favorable ruling by the judge because MDE did not do a very good job of showing like, hey, we think there's fraud going on here. So the judge ordered MDE to continue approving these sites. And then the community threw a party for Amy Bach. This is back in the summer of 2021. And at this party, there were local politicians there, like Minneapolis Councilmember Jamal Osman and state lawmaker Omar Fatah, who's now running for mayor of Minneapolis. And they were there, basically saying that MDE was racist and all, praise to Amy Bach for fighting him and getting the money to flow again.
Where does a Minneapolis restaurant owner Salim Saeed, who also was found guilty on all counts, where does he come in?
So he was one of the biggest fraudsters as far as amount of money stolen, and he was one of the first to participate. So Safari Restaurant is a well-known restaurant in the Somali community in South Minneapolis prior to the pandemic. And then when the pandemic started, a Feeding Our Future employee walked in there and basically recruited them to take part in this meal program. And they, within a few weeks, were claiming to serve up to 6,000 kids every single day, which is more kids than attend the largest high school in the state, which is Wayzata High School, and way more kids than exist in that portion of South Minneapolis. So it was just ridiculous numbers. He had the audacity to then expand it by opening up other meal sites across the state in Wilmer, and claimed to be serving more kids than even live in Wilmer, Mankato, Rochester, and just stole millions and millions of dollars. He intersected with Amy Bach because he then turned into one of the leaders in helping set up new sites, and he would work with her on that. And so there's lots of, communication between them. In addition, he essentially provided a kickback or a bribe to Amy Bach because she sold him a daycare that didn't even exist. There was no kids. She didn't own the building, but she called it a daycare. They bought it and then therefore gave her $310,000. And then in return, they claimed to be running a meal site out of this property that they were renting or whatever. So they intersected enough that the cases were tried together. Tell
us about the remarkable cross-examination of Saeed by, I believe, Joe Thompson, the assistant U.S. attorney, that I know stood out to you as being fairly extraordinary. What stood out about it?
Yeah, so the first, the testimony of Salim Saeed did not help his case at all. And Joe Thompson has been the lead prosecutor on this case since the very beginning when the charges were announced with Andy Luger that day. So he knows it better than anybody. When it kind of started with Salim, kind of lying about how many people go to Safari Restaurant because they have the tax records of how much business Safari did prior to the pandemic. And then Joe Thompson said, "You've never had 3,000 customers in one day before?" He goes, "Oh, I've had more than that." And then Thompson says, we show here that you've only made this X amount of money in receipts. And he goes, "Well, there's a lot of cash business in restaurants." And then Thompson goes, "What, you're telling me that you're committing tax evasion now at Safari Restaurant?" And that was just kind of like a laugh out loud moment. But then Thompson then went on to just absolutely hammer the fact that this guy spent so much money on these shopping sprees, just $9,000 a day at Nordstrom on clothes and shoes. And then he said, "But you don't spend any money on food." And then Saeed lied and said that he had a $2 million contract with Cisco, the food provider, to provide food for these meals. And Thompson goes, "Don't you lie to this jury." And then he said, when I'm done talking here, your lawyer can get up here and ask more questions, and I expect that he's going to show a receipt or an invoice that shows that you spent $2 million on food, if that's true. So it just dug a hole for Saeed. His attorney got up and, of course, didn't have any invoices to show. He showed a couple invoices for a couple $1,000s of food, but that's all they had. And it just absolutely buried him.
Remarkable. Yeah, it was a remarkable exchange for sure. Well worth that discussion. So they were both taken into custody. Is that correct? And because up until now, neither of them has been in jail at all. Is that right?
That's correct. In federal court, pretty much only violent offenders go to jail while they are awaiting their trial.
And so, what's the timetable in terms of sentencing, et cetera? What's the next step?
So at this point, not even the lawyers know because it's kind of unprecedented for this type of fraud. A lot of it comes down to dollar amounts. And they're basically saying that Amy Bach is responsible for $240 million worth of fraud herself. And that would put her potentially at like around 40 years in prison. Wow. 40 years in prison. And Salim Saeed, for his tens of millions, potentially put him at around 20 or 30 years in prison. So it could be very significant, but at the same time, they don't have that hammered out yet. That's what they're doing for the next several weeks before the sentencing hearing. They're going to figure out what the guidelines show, and then the judge will have discretion whether to follow the guidelines or not. She can do basically whatever she wants.
Are there any more trials yet? I mean, this was a big one, obviously. Are there more trials yet to come?
There are. I mean, they're scheduled. In fact, one is supposed to start in April. But I think it's kind of a wait and see because I predict that there's going to be a lot of guilty pleas after this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of incentive to plead guilty and spend a lot less time in prison than you would if you go to trial and testify and lie and so forth. One of the guys in that first trial, he wasn't even, one of the biggest players. He got 17 years in prison. And so, that just kind of set the bar for what everybody's going to be looking at. Saeed and Bach are going to get way more than that.
Yeah.
And I think if somebody could get a deal and spend 10 years in prison, they would probably take it at this point.
I appreciate you taking the time today. I know it was very, very crazy for you yesterday. So thanks for helping us out again today, and we'll keep in touch. Thanks, Lou.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan. I'm putting together a 1-hour streaming special on this to air on KARE 11 Plus, so look out for that if you're interested.
That sounds good. Thanks, Lou. We'll do that. Appreciate you. That is Lou Raguse, intrepid reporter for KARE 11, who's been front and center among those covering the Feeding Our Future trial and has been kind enough to join us several times, in part because of some of the stuff he picks up on, which I think has been pretty stunning. We quoted from one of actually his pieces, it was either last week or the week before as well. All right, let's get caught up. We're out a bit early today. I want to sort of set the table for Big Dance Day, what has happened to this point, what else there is to get to, and maybe we even reintroduce the question that we started this program with, which is whether the big dance as a concept feels as big to you as it might have in more glory college basketball periods. Don't go.
It's the Bumper to Bumper Show Wrap.
It's brought to you by American Pressure.
Well, the music is, the rap music's a little early because we're going to be out at the top of the 6 o'clock hour today. At that point, we're going to pick up big dance coverage via Westwood One. And what they tend to do, I think, is they kind of move around depending on which game is hot, which game is going well, which game might be a big finish, upset, etc. The Plus will provide you Golden Gopher women's basketball postseason tournament, not big dance tournament, but it's the consolation tournament. The Gophers are in Toledo to take on the University of Toledo in a first-round game there. On the question of whether the big dance is as big or feels as big, I don't think it does. I think a lot of our listeners early that we quoted from pretty much felt the same way, which, by the way, still isn't the same thing as saying there can't be good moments, there can't be drama. And, today, as we've talked about repeatedly, we love picking up on the storylines, right? I mean, and in this case, that included... there really hasn't been a buzzer beater, one could say, to this point, right? But what we did have was the 12-seed McNeese shocking the world, building a huge lead in the first half against Clemson. Clemson with a furious comeback. They cut it all the way to at the buzzer, I think 2 points, and end up McNeese holds on 69-67, with the storyline being the McNeese coach has already signed. Well, we don't know if he's already signed. He has reportedly agreed to terms with to coach at North Carolina State next year, and yet was going to coach and did coach his team, and very well, obviously. He was coaching against his alma mater. We've had history, like if you go back to when Michigan made its championship, made its tournament run, going all the way back to Bill Frieder. He decides to take a job, and Bo Schembechler, as I recall, was the AD and said, before the tournament, and the AD said, well, then go. You ain't staying here. Good riddance. If you don't like us, we're done with you. And a guy by the name of assistant by the name of Steve Fisher went the reins and took the team on a run all the way to the title, as I recall it. And so we have had precedent. I mean, that was a hell of a story for all the obvious reasons. But in that case, the coaching change was made immediately. In this case, maybe the AD said, fine, if you want to continue to coach, go ahead. And now the story will be, we'll just have to follow it from here and see how far it will go. In fact, they're playing a Big Ten team. They're playing Purdue, if I'm not mistaken, in the next round, correct?
That is correct.
That is my information. So there's always going to be good stories. There's no question about that. But in our case, I think it and people have touched on it. I think some of it is the portal it's become so transient from year to year that even by regular college basketball standards, where some kids leave early, when they leave early, though, they're generally going to the pros. And if they're going to transfer, they got to wait a year. All the rules have changed. Maybe it's better for the players. Maybe it's what the players deserve. But I do think it's added to the transients, and so it's harder to sort of glom on to any stories or feel like there's anything you can invest in and indeed even develop. I also think having some legendary coaches out, this has always been a sport, college basketball, much more, I think, than pro. It seems so coach-dominated, and the personalities have been big. And a lot of those personalities have moved on. They've retired. They've gotten older. In the case of Bob Knight, they passed away, although he had obviously left the game long before he died. But all those things, I think, do enter into exactly what we're talking about here. Number of texts have come in on a number of different subjects. Timberwolves have to be among the saddest, most embarrassing franchises in the history of sports. That's from, what area code is this?
858.
Yeah, I've never heard of. I don't think I've ever heard of 858. See what 858 is.
I'll tell you right now.
I'm going to need 858 guy to narrow that down a little. If he's talking about historically, yes, there's no denying it. If he's talking about because they lost their last two games, that might be a bit hyperbole behind that, but maybe he can explain if 858 guy is listening. Did you
somewhere where I wouldn't mind being right now, San Diego.
San Diego, California. Wow. That's not bad. Dan, I was a little hi. Dan B was a little upset. Hi, Dan B. I think he's saying he was a little upset we didn't sign A-Rod simply because we missed out on a season filled of sticking it to Gerby for the second time, a la heartbreak over Brett Favre. Well,
Gerby's been through enough, damn it.
He has.
Come on.
But what's interesting about that is most Vikings fans didn't make that their biggest priority. I didn't think. I think it was more, Rodgers is done, and all we're going to do is make life too pleasurable for Packers fans as they watch him implode in Minnesota after having been, obviously, a Super Bowl winning quarterback, albeit only once, in Green Bay. So that's an interesting tack. Now, if you recall, when Favre was recruited and came, the original feeling was a lot of rebellion here. We don't want him. I've always rooted against him. I hate him. And I don't want to give Green Bay any satisfaction that if we do win, it's with their guy. Well, how many weeks later were people going, God, I love this guy. I can't get enough of this guy. And it completely turned. But at the start, there was a lot of that sort of anti-Favre feeling. I don't know if that's the case here again. In this particular situation, I'm not exactly sure. Dan, that meal fraud is exactly why Doge is necessary. We're getting ripped off all over the state of Minnesota on a smaller scale, but nationally. There's a big difference between Doge in theory and the way it has gone about its business. And I don't want to get into these arguments right now. It's really not worth it. But what we found, I think most people are against wretched excess and fraud and waste. And there's always room for discussion, digging deeper than probably has been dug, certainly federally. But you're conflating two things that may seemingly go together, but I would argue that so much of what has been declared as waste that we've taken care of, 4 days later, it's all been removed from their own website because their own information was false in the first place. Some of the stuff had already been eliminated. And the issue for me all along has been dig in, but take more than 15 minutes to do the digging. Because we're seeing time after time circumstances, we shouldn't have done this, we should have added that. Well, this really had nothing to do with what we were trying to eliminate, and this was a big mistake, and we're going to put this back because these jobs are important. And it's because we're in too much of a hurry. This is the sort of stuff that should be done without dramatic, performative declarations every 15 minutes, and then you'd have something. You get no argument for me on what the Feeding Our Future meal fraud story portends here and what it exemplifies here and how important it is to continue to follow that particular story. I think $75 million has been recovered. Can you ask Lou what he thinks the final recovery number will be? I didn't get to that. I think he's right on that number. I think a lot of the money regarding Feeding Our Future is long gone. I don't think it's likely to go anywhere at this point, but I could be wrong. One other thing, speaking of, we've gotten into this subject before. The not just Trump, but also some of his minions bitter about the so-called radical leftist judge, Judge Boasberg, who should the accusation is that he should be impeached. And what's interesting about that, well, we laid out, we gave the bumper seal of approval to a Supreme Court justice who had, I think, the courage to call out the notion that if you disagree with the judge needs to be impeached. He's been very consistent. It was Roberts. Very consistent on that because he called out a couple of Democrats when they went down that road with some very incendiary language a while back. But I digress. A little more detail on the judge who many of the Trumpists have described as the radical leftist judge. He's the same judge who ordered the release of 14,000 of Hillary Clinton's emails. He's the same judge who dismissed the Trump tax return lawsuit, ensuring his taxes didn't become public. He's the same judge who upheld parts of a work requirements bill for a Medicaid program in Kentucky. He's the same judge who limited the scope of the Mueller investigation disclosures. And he's the same judge who issued lighter sentences for J6 rioters than prosecutors sought. Want more? He's the same judge who limited grand jury material disclosure in Trump's classified documents case. And the ideas and the examples go on and on and on. The moral of the story is you don't get to only include the detail about a judge's rulings that allow you to call him what you have irresponsibly called him, a radical leftist judge. You can't leave out the ones that would indicate that at the very least it might be a little bit more complicated than exactly the picture, the rather oversimplified picture that you're interested in doing. We've already seen that at the U.S. Supreme Court. The number of alliances that have involved so-called righty members of the court and lefty members of the court, which would indicate that the cliches these judges get reduced to do not always necessarily follow as well. Where were we? Oh, let me get to. Will you do me a favor and find? I was trying to find this on the fly here. Okay, I'll get it. I'll get it while we go, and I'll continue to look at some emails. So, yeah, it was the national championship that Steve Fisher won was in 1989, and that goes back a ways now, but how do you get a better story than the regular coach takes a job with another team? I want to say it was Arizona State. Bill Frieder was his name, and as I mentioned, Bo Schembechler got so PO'd that he said, because I think, as I recall it, Frieder said, I'll coach here through the tournament if you'd like. And Schembechler said, we want a Michigan man coaching this team. You're not it. You want to go someplace else? Go. And Steve Fisher gets promoted and takes the team to the national championship in 1989. That was, you put that storyline or angle in 2025, and probably the internet would explode. I think it would be very, very likely that would indeed be the case. It was one hell of a story. And as I said, in this case, this year, the McNeese story is that I'm not saying the McNeese is on its way to winning a national championship, but what they have done is they've won a first-round game as a 12 seed, and in this case, the coach apparently is being allowed, the coach who's about to go to North Carolina State is being allowed to stay with this team. So the longer they stay in this tournament, the further they get, the bigger the story is going to get, and their next game is a Big Ten game against Purdue, or a game against Big Ten team, the Purdue Boilermakers. Let me get I think we got some more Big Ten action tonight, if I'm not mistaken. Let me get what we have coming up tonight. Yeah, we have, so by the way, Gonzaga did end up destroying Georgia, right? 89-68. You gave that score, I think, in the top 5 at 5. So we got Arkansas KU later tonight, Drake, Missouri.
Watch out for Drake.
You're right. And that with a highly regarded coach, I might add as well. He's supposed to be, I can't remember his name. I think he's supposed to be next Iowa coach, allegedly.
That's the rumor.
That's at least the rumor. I keep forgetting UCLA's in the Big Ten. So that's another Big Ten game. They play later tonight. And Michigan is playing University of California, San Diego tonight. That was the other school I was thinking of. All of that is tonight. So for me, you were talking about local angles. For me, it's still some of it that helps is still the Big Ten. I like to pay attention to what Big Ten teams are doing. That's certainly a part of what keeps me going. And again, we've not really had what would be called a classic buzzer beater kind of a finish that we're all looking for. But the McNeese story, so far, that would probably be the best story, correct?
Oh, it has to be.
Because it turned into a dramatic, effort. Clemson got back in it. I think, though, the layup they were down 4 at the buzzer and got a layup with less than a second to go. So it wasn't, I think it was more a 4-point game than a 2-point game. I think the closest they got, I thought, was 3.
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah, they tried to get a last-second 3, missed it. Guy got the rebound and laid it in.
Okay.
Didn't matter anyways. But yeah, that's always, I feel like you always hear about the 12-5. That's always, whenever you're filling out your brackets, that's the one that you always hear about. What's going to be the 12-5 upset this year? So,
yeah, correct.
It comes to fruition again.
We also mentioned that the Boston Celtics, and this must make Glenn Taylor sick. I mean, although if you're a billionaire, can you ever be sick? I mean, he's already a billionaire, but nevertheless, if you're a billionaire, you always want more. And the Boston Celtics have reportedly sold for a U.S. American team record, pro team record, at least for the moment, $6.1 billion. And I believe the sell price that Glenn Taylor agreed to with A-Rod and Mark Lowry, 3 years ago, whenever it was when they actually made their original deal, was $1.5 million. So he's got, now again, that's a few years ago, inflation, I get that, but nevertheless, the working theory behind the scenes was that part of the reason that Glenn kind of wanted to nullify the deal was seller's remorse and maybe price remorse as well, and that's understandable. I did not ask Johnny this again Monday. Are we still waiting for Glenn? Did I miss it? Did Glenn say I'm not appealing in any way, shape, or form the arbitrator's decision? I thought we were all kind of waiting for that until, and then it was only at that point that then the date might be set for the Board of Governors to review and make their own vote up or down on A-Rod and Lowry as being Mark Lowry being the new owners of the Minnesota Timberwolves. I gotta ask him that. I might text him and get the answer to that question, because at some point, I don't think the new guys should be prisoner to Glenn Taylor waiting forever before making that declaration. And if he made the declaration, let me know. I might have missed it, but I don't think, I don't recall that it was taking place. And last time we talked about this with Johnny, basically that's what he said. He goes, well, in terms of the Board of Governors, even the commissioner said there, that Glenn Taylor, there's still time for Taylor to determine how he was going to proceed. And I thought this was a binding ruling, and the only way to appeal it would be to call into question a conflict of interest, which is a pretty significant charge and a pretty difficult charge, I think, to prove at this point. So we'll try to maybe get that story updated tomorrow. Tomorrow's episode of the program should also include a visit with Lavelle E. Neal III and Ben Gessling. I've got a couple other things up my sleeve, but no guarantees on that. Podcast Russo today. He joined between 4:30 and 5. Very good stuff for him. We're out early today for NCAA Big Dance action. All of that via Westwood One is next right here in the Fan.
I'll be there whenever you want me. I'll be there whenever
the stories a stadium could tell.
Did you see the game? I'll be around.
Optimize your nutrition with Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal service. Factor's fresh, never-frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from 40 weekly options across 8 dietary preferences, like Calorie Smart and Protein Plus. Factor's keto meals can help you lose up to 8 pounds in 8 weeks. Get started at factormeals.com/factor50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Weight loss with Factor Keto based on a randomized controlled clinical trial. Results will vary depending on diet and exercise.